So welcome to this month's webinar. I'm Geoff Perlman, founder and CEO of Xojo, and today I'm going to be talking about what's new in Xojo Cloud. So if you have any questions, you can put them in the questions panel in Zoom, and I'll answer as many as I can at the end. So make sure you utilize that. Before we get started, Xojo Cloud is 10 years old this month, which is a anniversary we're really proud of. And I've got an interesting statistic regarding that, actually, which I'll share with you later in the webinar. So I'm going to be talking about a few key Xojo Cloud features first. There's a couple of things in Xojo Cloud that they don't have a visual interface component, so it's easy to forget that they're there, and they can affect how you architect your web app. So I'm going to go over those just to make sure you're aware of them. We'll talk about what's new in Xojo Cloud, and I'll have some time for a Q&A at the end. This is going to be a short webinar. It's not going to be a real long one. So the first thing I want to talk about as a key feature is automatic load balancing. This is an easy thing to forget, that Xojo Cloud automatically load balances your app. Now, if you have a small server, this doesn't really affect you because there's only going to be one instance of any Xojo web app running. But if you have a medium or large server, it definitely makes a difference. So let's start with a medium server. A medium server has 4 virtual CPUs. So that's made up of essentially like 4 cores. And when you have that, one of those is running the OS, dedicated just to that. But the other 3 are all running individual instances of your app or your apps if you have more than one. But for the purposes of this discussion, let's talk about an app. So each one's running its own instance. And as users connect, they're then automatically shared, or rather dispersed among those instances. So what this means is that if you're architecting an app to say, let's say you want to know how many concurrent users you have, concurrent sessions. Well, you can't just look at the number of sessions, the session count for your app, because that's only going to be the sessions for that instance of the app. And you could have multiple instances running. So that means you're going to need to write that data to some shared location and then aggregate it to get the actual number. That could be a database. It could be files. If it's going to be files, make sure it's a separate file for each instance, though, because you don't want them trying to write to the same file at the same time. Now, if you have a large server, it's even bigger. A large server will have 1 core or virtual CPU for the OS and then 7 more app instances. So that's even more users per instance. Now, one of the things that people sometimes ask is, well, how many concurrent connections does one instance handle? That really depends. It's kind of like saying, how many people can be transported in a vehicle. A motorcycle holds 1 or 2. A commercial airliner holds hundreds. So it really matters what your application is doing. The more lightweight the application is, the less processing it's doing, the more users it's going to be able to manage. So it's hard to say, but one of the things you can do is you can move up. You can start with a small server, move up to a medium. And if you start hearing from users that the app is getting sluggish, that might mean that it's time to move up to a server with more virtual CPUs. Now, if you get to that point and that's still not enough, let's say you've got a large server and people are, you're really successful. So people are complaining that the app is getting sluggish. We can do custom load balancing for you beyond what is automatic. In that case, we can chain together any number of servers, typically large servers, with each one, of course, having 7 virtual CPUs that are dedicated to running instances of your app. So you can imagine that would support a large number of concurrent connections. And really, we could make that as big as you like. Another advantage of doing this, should you get to this size, is that if we're going to set up custom load balancing for you, one of the things we can do is if your application is using a database server, then we can move that database server to its own server, not one you're using for your app, but a dedicated server. And then we can remove that server from the internet for security purposes, and then create a secure tunnel between your Xojo Cloud servers and that database server. So for security, that's great because basically means your database server isn't accessible to the internet. So that can be very, very secure. And speaking of security, there are 3 security layers to Xojo Cloud. The first one is a custom firewall. Now, this isn't just any firewall. We had this custom written for us. It blocks all incoming ports except for 80 and 443. Those are for HTTP and HTTPS. It also by default blocks all the outgoing ports. But if your application needs to open ports temporarily, then the firewall port class in the framework is for that purpose. You can open and close ports at will. Another nice, interesting feature of the firewall port class is that if you have an instance of that class and you open some ports and then you let that instance go out of scope, it'll automatically close all those ports. So as you're architecting your solution, that might be a great way to do it. If you're only opening them for use, maybe you've got a class that's going to connect to some external source, you make an instance of the firewall port class and you put it on a property, say, of your class. When your class goes out of scope, the firewall port class will go out of scope and all those ports will close. So that's something to think about. And again, this is not just a dumb firewall. It analyzes connection behavior to detect hackers. And when it detects one, the IPs are blocked. So if you have a user who's telling you that they can't get into your app, they're being blocked, chances are they were behaving in some way that made them look like a hacker. Doesn't happen very often, but it happened to us a lot when we were testing the firewall back in the beginning because we kept doing things that made us look like hackers. So that's a really great feature, and it's an easy one to forget about, but it's there protecting you. Now, the second layer of security is called Security Enhanced Linux. If you don't know what this is, it was developed by the United States National Security Agency, or better known as the NSA. It protects the Linux kernel from modification. It limits the ability for installed applications to do damage, which is really important should some renegade, malware get on your server. But it's complex. There's over 1,000 pages of documentation for Security Enhanced Linux. The good news is you don't have to read any of those. We do that for you. But it makes Security Enhanced Linux kind of impractical for individual servers. If you went and got a server somewhere, it's not really practical because it's so complicated. But it's very practical for Xojo Cloud because all of our servers are configured identically. Now, the last layer of security is binary applications. As you guys know, you build a web app in Xojo and it's a binary application. Most web technology, HTML and JavaScript and all that, it's all just text files. So if somebody got through all the 2 other layers of security and they got to your application, with a traditional framework using JavaScript and HTML and CSS, they could see all your intellectual property. They could steal it. The binary application, they can't do that. And I think at that point, they'd probably move on. Honestly, most hackers just want to use your server to send spam or use it for a denial of service attack. They're probably not targeting you. And so what you want to do is be secure enough that they just move on to some other server that's not so secure. Now, I mentioned that it's our 10-year anniversary. Well, for Xojo Cloud, that is. Well, in those 10 years, there have been billions of attempts against Xojo Cloud servers. And in all that time, in those billions of attempts, the total known security breaches we've had are 0. So now it may not always be 0, but it's 0 right now. And I think that's a real testament to how secure Xojo Cloud is. Now, another thing I want to remind you about is I'm sure you know that Xojo Cloud has PostgreSQL and MySQL installed, and you can turn those on, in the control panel with just a checkbox. And of course, you can use SQLite on Xojo Cloud as well. But don't forget that these can be used by more than just web apps. Xojo Cloud servers allow you to tunnel in via SSH. That's another thing you can turn on from the control panel. which means that you can use PostgreSQL and MySQL from desktop applications. So I mentioned this after talking about security because it's a great secure way to host a database server, whether it's a solely desktop client application or it's some hybrid application where maybe some people are using a desktop application and other use web application. It's a great way to do that with Xojo Cloud. Now, updates are something we handle for you because Xojo Cloud is a managed service. So we handle all the updating for you. That means things like updates to the OS. It also means that we take care of security patches, and those happen a lot more frequently than you'd think. We update monthly or even more often as needed. If there's some kind of big breach, not breach, but some kind of big security hole that's found and it's really serious, we will update right away rather than wait for the monthly update. We also do backups. Now, this is something where I want to make it really, really clear. We only do a single daily backup. The purpose of that backup is if a server crashed, which I don't think has ever happened, but if it did, then we'd have a backup. If you make a mistake and something gets deleted or modified that you didn't mean to, contact us right away and we'll see about recovering your data from your nightly backup. I think they happen at midnight. I think they happen at midnight Central Time. It might be GMT. I'm not sure. That's probably in the documentation. But anyway, if you run into that situation, make sure you contact us right away so we can help you out with trying to recover from backup. Also remember that we have secure FTP. So if you wanted to set up something that copies data on a regular basis from your Xojo Cloud server elsewhere, you could certainly do that. Again, even with a console app, you could tunnel in through SSH and copy files as needed. Okay, so what's new with Xojo Cloud this month? Well, we are going to be doing a major OS update. This is super rare. We very, very rarely do this. We're moving from CentOS 7 to Alma Linux 9. Now, why are we doing this? We don't make big updates very often because we don't want the behavior of your server to change. We don't want something to unexpectedly change from under you. So it's years and years between major updates. But CentOS 7 is now at end of life. It's not being updated anymore. They're no longer issuing security updates for it. So it's time for us to move to something that is in active support, and that's Alma Linux 9. Alma Linux 9 is basically the open source version of Red Hat Enterprise Linux. We use these enterprise versions of Linux because they have long-term support. It means that we can install them and know that we can keep supporting that version for years and years with updates and security patches and things like that. So that's the reason for the update. What you can expect to see is increased OS performance. Now, obviously, your mileage will vary on this depending on what your applications are doing, but you should get some increased OS performance. And of course, this allows us to keep doing security updates, which is the big reason for making this change. Now, when's all this going to happen? All servers are going to be updated next week. So you probably got notice of that if you have a Xojo Cloud server today. You probably got notice of that, and we're trying to accommodate individual schedules to the degree that we can. Now, don't forget that we have a blog, and we occasionally do blog posts about Xojo Cloud. In fact, Paul Lefevre, one of our engineers, wrote a blog post quite recently about how Xojo Cloud is more than just web hosting. You can use it for many other things, some of which I've talked about. And of course, don't forget that we have a lot of information about Xojo Cloud in the docs. And you guys are the users of Xojo Cloud. So if you run into a bug or if you have a feature you'd like to see us add to Xojo Cloud, make sure you're going to issues.xojo.com and using our system there to report those to us. Because we really, we think up a lot of things on our own, but we also depend on you guys to tell us what you need. And with that, I'm going to see if we have any questions. Let me get to the panel. Oh, there it is. Q&A. Okay. So we have one question from Joe. Could you share how many users are currently using let me say that again. Could you share how many users are currently using Xojo Cloud? We don't provide that information, partially for security. We don't want to paint too big a target on our backs. In fact, I wasn't really sure about saying that we've never had a known security breach. We've known that for a very long time. Uh, but when you say that, people tend to think, oh, well, I'll show them. So we don't share that, but we do have a lot of users on Xojo Cloud. And I will say this, pretty reliably, the number of servers grows every year. And it's interesting. It's a fairly predictable measurement. So, we can kind of, more than anything else, we can kind of predict exactly how many servers we're likely to have, in following years. So it's a good part of our business. We intend to have it for a very long time. And we've got all kinds of really interesting features that we will be adding to it in the future. So don't worry about that. We're very dedicated to it. We know there's no solution like it. And I didn't say this earlier, and I think you guys know this, but when we decided to support building web apps in Xojo long ago, we realized that building them the traditional way is really complicated, and we could make it so much easier. But when we did that, we also recognized that building the app is really only half the problem. The other half the problem is deploying it, which honestly, I say half because deploying a web app is at least as much trouble as building one because of all the headaches and issues you have to deal with. I mean, with a mobile app or a desktop app, it's on a device. You don't have to worry so much about security. But with a web app, it's out on the internet. So it's very much something you have to think about. So that's why we created Xojo Cloud, because we think Xojo Cloud is necessary for building web apps in Xojo to be successful. Now, not everybody deploys on Xojo Cloud, but for many of you, it's the best solution. Okay, we got another question. Dirk says, do you have or know how many fintech apps are connecting New York Stock Exchange running on Xojo Cloud? Yeah, that'd be great if the New York Stock Exchange ran on Xojo Cloud. I would never sleep at night, but just because of the responsibility that would go along with that. But no, I'm not aware of that. Honestly, we don't get a lot of knowledge about what kind of apps are running on servers. We look at Xojo Cloud more at the server level. We don't dig in, we typically don't look at it at any user's server, for example, unless they ask us to. So we wouldn't know what kind of apps they're running on their Xojo Cloud. But I will say that when I do talk to users that use Xojo Cloud, just like the Xojo community, the variety is vast. I mean, you have all kinds of different apps running on Xojo Cloud. So, and that's something I say when people ask, well, what do people build with Xojo? It's more like what do people not build with Xojo? I mean, it's really that vast. So Joe had another question. Can you share your future vision plans for upcoming features? I'll share one thing. We've got a lot of things, and I don't want to, we have to prioritize them. So I don't want to set expectations unreasonably. But something that I've personally been involved with is building something that will make it really easy for mobile apps to use Xojo Cloud for accessing databases. As I mentioned earlier, it's for mobile, well, maybe I didn't mention this. For mobile, it's a whole different story with databases. If you're going to access a database server, unlike the web and unlike desktop, you can't connect to the server and stay connected because the OS, not us, but the OS will see that connection is taking up too much battery and it will cut you off. So you have to connect to a database or any kind of server for mobile. You have to connect asynchronously. And I know you have to do that, but it sure is a hassle. It's not how we're used to coding. So I've been working on a utility that, if it works out and gets through all the beta testing, we'll add it to Xojo Cloud. that basically gives you the database API acting in what feels like a synchronous connection, but actually is asynchronous behind the scenes. So you'd be able to use PostgreSQL and MySQL on Xojo Cloud as a database server for your mobile apps without having to write your own middleware in between to manage that. You would just use the database API as you're used to. We've got a lot of other ideas for Xojo Cloud, and hopefully we'll be getting to those. And look at our timeline in the docs. We give you a list of features that we're working on, and when you see things start showing up on that list, you'll know that they're coming in the not too distant future. So, and of course, like I said before, if you have feature requests, please, please, please go into issues, create the feature request, try to make the summary as simple as you can so that when other people search, they'll find yours and they'll upvote it. Because the more people that upvote a feature, the more interested we are in implementing that feature. Okay. Doesn't look like we have any more questions. Yeah. Well, let me close this. I appreciate you all coming. This was one of our shorter webinars, but thanks for watching. And thank you for your continued support of Xojo. It allows us to do what we love to do every day. Bye for now.